Marketing as a whole is branding and brand awareness. And in a digital world, without a digital brand, all other marketing efforts can struggle. But what exactly is a digital brand and who needs one? Is it individuals? Is it just businesses? Maybe even products? Well, my guest this episode is a sought after strategist, thought leader, and influencer. He is the founder and CEO of Digital Delane, a full service digital agency, and the founder of Digital Branding Institute. He frequently delivers talks around the country advancing the practices of digital branding, and he's known for making complex digital branding strategies accessible as he speaks at marketing conferences including Digital Summit, Social Media Marketing World, Content Marketing World, and more. To help us gain clarity and learn more about digital branding, it's my pleasure to welcome to the podcast, Juntae Delane. How's it going, man?
Hey, Ailey, how's it going? It's going well. How about yourself?
Going great.
Yeah.
Going great. Looking forward to talking to you today.
Yeah. It's about time we finally collaborated on some projects. I know I've seen you on the speaking trail a couple times, and so it's nice to finally put something on tape, so to speak.
Yeah, and I'm sure we've probably crossed paths a few times while speaking at marketing events, probably
hmm
even before we actually even met each other.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, great minds think alike. Great minds are around the same circle, man. And so, definitely a pleasure to do this podcast with you.
For sure. So, one of the topics of yours that I enjoy hearing your insights on is digital branding. And so, I guess to get the episode started out with a clear footing, what is your definition of a digital brand?
Yeah, so a digital brand is essentially your identity, visibility, and credibility in the digital space. And we essentially have created that definition of digital branding. We, being my team and I at Digital Branding Institute. And really, we want everyone to focus on building a digital brand and incorporating the three tenets of a digital brand. And so when we talk about identity, it's obviously you would think, oh, a nice website, maybe an app, so on and so forth. But it's more than that. It's all the digital touch points that make up your brand online.
Mhm.
And when it comes to visibility, has everything to do essentially with your advertising, search engine optimization. Where are you visible in a specific industry that you reside? And then the credibility, it's obviously again a culmination of all those touch points that provides that credibility. And so this could be, as an example, your ratings or reviews. It could be the perception that your target audience gets from you based on the content that you create. So it's all interwoven. It all of these tenets work together, and you can consider, your traditional digital marketing tactics underneath each tenet, right? So for that identity, as I mentioned earlier, you have your social media, you have content marketing, right? For visibility, as I mentioned, advertising, SEO, credibility, ratings, reviews, and so on. So that is essentially the definition of digital branding.
So there's a lot to that. There's a
Yeah.
lot of places, a lot of bases to cover for digital branding. And like earlier today, I was consulting with a client who came to me about content, and we got into a kind of a conversation of your area of what was their digital brand, and so they were trying to figure out where do they even start with so many things to do. So I was giving them the content portion of it, but as you mentioned, there's a whole lot to digital branding. So where do you start when someone's in the process of creating or mapping out a digital brand? Where should they start?
Well, that's a great point. And I think first, it really depends upon where you are in your process. And so, if you're at the ground level where you either have an idea or you're trying to even position yourself, and that kind of bleeds over into personal branding, which I'll get into the connection later.
Mhm.
But when you're starting from scratch, you want to make sure that you obviously have your home base because that is actually something that you can control. That home base, uh, before maybe 3 years ago, excuse me, let's start from the top. Before it, like maybe 10 years ago, it was a website. You had to have a website. Then it kind of went over to, well, most of your audience is on social media. So you have to have a social media page, whether that's back in the day when MySpace was prominent or Facebook, because the algorithms were keeping people on the platforms and the content that you put out through those platforms, if it promoted people to stay on the platform, you're going to get rewarded with more organic reach.
Yeah.
However, as we know, there's a mass exodus for Facebook being the granddaddy of them all. So people are starting to create their own brands. The platforms that they're building these brands on have started to have shaky ground, right? In terms of privacy issues, in terms of people's perceptions of these platforms, and so on. So now the pendulum has swung to back to your website, right?
Mm.
So, and this is in terms of what's most important, right? Like you should certainly have a presence in all of these platforms, but in terms of where you should focus the majority of your time in building a brand, certainly now it's a website. So once you have that website developed, then you also have to fill that website, right, with content, with your brand messaging, with all the things that you need in order to convert your target audience. Based on that platform that you've developed, then you want to make sure that you're bringing more people into it. So that's really having to do with other parts of the other tenets of digital branding. So we have the advertising, we have SEO, and so on. So you want to create campaigns that are in line with that tenet, and then the ratings and reviews for your credibility, and also the established brand voice that resonates with your target audience, the types of content that you're creating in terms of being authentic, transparent, and so on, that also adds to that credibility piece, is certainly needed. So even when you think about the digital branding, each traditional digital marketing tactic is a piece of a puzzle. And I consider digital branding that puzzle. So
Okay.
just like you would focus on a specific puzzle out of a box, right? A physical puzzle, you have a strategy around where you're going, what you're going to do when putting together that puzzle. And every puzzle is different, right? Just like every industry is different, every company's or brand's objectives are different. So that's when you go to strategists like myself and you, so we can help people figure this all out, right? So that's
Yeah.
that's essentially where I would start.
And that's important too, because it isn't as cut and dry as here's a map, because it's what is your map. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
each business's, each person's map will be different depending on what they're trying to do, what kind of assets they already have, where their website is in terms of, like you said, SEO, and what kind of content do they have. Everyone's map is different, so I guess the starting point would be different depending on where you're already at, right?
Exactly. And I think another thing too, that I would be remiss if I didn't mention, is focusing on your target audience, right? So what we talked about earlier was everything having to do with your brand, setting that up, and getting the brand ready for business. But we also have to consider the journey of your target audience, right? So where are those members, and what type of content, what type of interactions or engagements are you going to need to help create some call to action, and bring them into the funnel, so to speak, right? So these are all certainly important things to consider, especially nowadays, right? I mean, the market has changed so much, right? And I mean, even we were talking earlier offline about speaking engagements that we're having, and is it's just really exciting to get back on the road. But then there's also that sense of fear when it comes to the different variants of the coronavirus, and threats to shut down again. And I think when building a brand during this time, you certainly have to think about the psyche of your target audience, and any market changes in their any behavioral changes as a result of the market changes that have to be considered when trying to focus on your target audience and their journey.
I wanted to ask you a question that I'm kind of going a direction that we don't really, as marketers, talk about much, but it's a reality in today's world, which is how far of a company's brand should you consider that leaks into your own personal brand? And I'll tell you why I'm asking that question. For me, recently, this is from a consumer standpoint. I've recently hired an electrician. I've recently hired, air condition guy, And the weird thing is, this is going to sound really creepy, but this is actually where we are today. I know what my electrician's family looks like.
Hmm.
I know what my air conditioning guy's house looks like. And the reason why those mattered to me as someone shopping was because I'm thinking, okay, I want this guy, this electrician, to come into my house around my family. I don't want them watching the whole time. Who is this person? Who am I asking to come into my house, especially during, this time? So, it sounds creepy, but this is where we are today.
Yeah.
So I found out about him through Facebook. I found out who he was. I saw his family. He has like four beautiful children, a wife, a nice home, which tells me as a consumer that he won't be doing too much risky stuff because he has a family himself to
Hmm.
protect.
Hmm.
He takes care of his own home, so he won't be cutting holes in mine without asking the question because he understands that. He'll understand me protecting my kids and my family because he has kids and family. All those things matter. With the electrician, not the HVAC guy, same thing. His house is nicer than mine, so I know that when he comes in, he'll think twice before he walks in with muddy boots. Because that's what I see of him. This is part of his digital brand. They may not realize it. In fact, I took both of them. Just I want to give them this marketing advice that
Hmm.
I hired you based off of things that you probably did not realize were part of your brand. You got hired because your brand goes beyond your website. So my question to you is, are we there yet? Are companies or people thinking about how far their brand can go, how deep it may go into their personal lives?
Oh man, I love that question, Alien. I feel like there's so much to unpack. So I would say that the old adage of people like to do business with people they know, like, and trust, right? And when we think about that and how that contributes to your digital brand, it's very important and really provides a case study on why you need to build a digital brand, right? And
Mhm.
focus on building that digital brand. But let's take a step back and think about why consumers think this way, because you're not obviously the only person that thinks about this, right? And
Mhm.
so I think really it's because many consumers feel burned and they have developed a sense of mistrust in organizations. And all of that has happened for me, I think, since the collapse of or the financial meltdown in it was at 2008, right? It was the
Mhm.
housing and financial meltdown, and you had the Occupy Wall Street movement, right? And people were just upset. They didn't like major corporations. I mean, the corporate word had a negative connotation to it because they felt like there were so many shady and unethical things being done in business. Now you see more businesses starting to open up, right? They're pulling back the curtain, showing you behind the process, behind the scenes, the process of making their products, or people behind the services, so on and so forth. Even to the point where people, the people that organizations assign themselves with or hired are even vetted, right? In terms
Mhm.
of their background, their past, their beliefs, so on and so forth. So all of this really is aligned with what you were thinking and saying earlier in that story you told. So why do we need to continue to consider this, right? Well, one thing I think is important is to recognize that when aligning your personal brand with the business brand, it's almost imperative because, again, like you, people want to know who's behind the brand, what are the intentions around the business that's being done, right? And usually you can get a sense of that based on that person or that company's brand footprint, right? And so
Mhm.
that's like I said, I love the story because it really leads into why people need to focus on building that digital brand. And I think, you know, you're certainly probably going to want to figure out, or people are going to figure out, like, I may have a hard time incorporating my personal life with my business life, right? And it goes for, a singles, sole proprietor, or solopreneur, or a CMO or CEO of a large enterprise organization, right? there has to be some personal component, because almost like sugar with the medicine, right? That
Yeah.
goes down. It helps to really um, look at what your marketing message is. It could be, but it's packaged in a way that is delivered authentically through the personal interactions and the personalized content that a brand could be creating. So it's very important, very, very important to have that personality. And so what that specifically looks like is you having, let's say, if you have a personal Instagram account and you also have a business Instagram account, what type of content should you be creating on either one of those platforms? Well, you can consider, on your business account, let's say, we are at a speaking engagement, and um, on our business account, we may announce that we're at this speaking engagement, and we may even talk about some of the key topics or sessions, right, from a business perspective, because we know anyone who follows that account is probably going to want to know that information. However, on our personal account, we can include that information and our own spin or experience during that event, which means,
Mhm.
hey, I met this person. I haven't caught up with this person in a while. Or, hey, these are some key takeaways personally, right? Or these are some of the things that I'm thinking about for the business, and I just made good deal, major connection, so on and so forth. So that's the type of content that you can put on your personal brand. And then the overarching content could be on your business brand as well. So that's a very sort of in-depth way to kind of start from the top and figure out, why are consumers even thinking this way? Where is this distrust coming from? To the specific ways in which you can incorporate your personal identity into that business brand, and some specific tactics on how to do so on Instagram.
Yeah. Well, for
Yeah.
me, the takeaway of that is today people can research you,
Hmm.
and you can't have this corporate front or this business front, and not think people won't look deeper. Because as you said, people want to do business with people, and if I like you, I'm more likely to do business with you.
Exactly.
And for me, like you said, I can't be the only one. For me, if I'm down to two vendors, I might want to see, do I like this person? And if one person's brand doesn't have any mention of people or give me a sense of who am I doing business with, and it's not more than just a website. If you compare, do I do business with website, blind but with no people involved, or do business with website with the guy who likes to go skiing just like I do?
Right.
It's something. Give me something. I think, but I'm interested in looking to. I know you have these guides in terms of digital branding, and I know they have different personas, different formats. So I definitely want to look into those and see you know how those um, will be, I guess, individualized to those different
Mhm.
things. So speaking of that, so I was on your website and I saw you had these different checklists for digital branding, and there were some for small businesses, some for attorneys, physicians, consultants. So can you give us some common items that may be on all those checklists in terms of what you should be looking for when you're creating your digital brand?
Yeah, so we have developed a digital branding formula, and some of those insights are included in the checklist on Digital Branding Institute, and it's really some of the main framework for our approach to building brands at the Digital Delane, the agency. And so essentially, it's one centralized framework that has specific insights and references, data, tools for those particular industries or occupations, as an example. So if you can go to digitalbrandinginstitute.com and check those out. But essentially, the focus is for each individual checklist, what are some specific resources that are needed in order to help you build the brand? So, for example, for ratings and reviews, there are certain websites that are out there for a specific industries, whether you have, Angie's List, or you know, I think WebMD or something like that, right? Like
Mhm.
there are, these resources that you need to have a presence on. So we make sure that we include some of those resources in the list, that really are aligned with the main framework of digital branding.
So they're industry specific. So depending on
Mhm.
your industry, you need to know what branding points are important to your industry that are different from others.
100%. Yep.
Okay. Interesting.
Mhm.
So I look forward to that. I'm going to check out a couple of those, and I encourage the listeners to check out those as well, especially pertaining to your individual industry.
Mhm.
Um, a few months back, you developed an event called the Digital Brand Summit. And I'll admit, I missed out on that because you invited me to speak and I
That's
was busy and I
right.
slipped up.
That's right. That
I'm slipping. I'll
I'm
have to
wagging
catch it
my
next
finger,
time.
bruh.
Yeah, yeah, I messed up. That's shame on me for missing that one because, especially after you developed it, I was like, man, this looks amazing, and I just hate that I missed out. And I noticed you managed to gather some really top level speakers for that virtual event that was even, I think, before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So, tell me what was it like to come up with and develop this kind of virtual event?
Well, I could tell you one thing, it was a lot of hard work for sure. And I wanted to build this summit because one, I wanted to make sure that I advanced the practice of digital branding, the thought process around it. And I knew I had a bunch of influencers, thought leaders, specialists, practitioners, and so on that could speak to each component of digital branding. And I wanted to put all of them together, and I was so lucky and blessed to have them, have them in their time, um, speaking at the summit. We had a great programming there. We had some speakers from all across the country, who are again those thought leaders. And one of the key takeaways for the Digital Branding Summit was that, um, our approach to having a QA session, after the like at the end of the day, where we brought
Mhm.
together all of the instructors and the presenters for a QA. I mean, it made like for a powerhouse panel session with QAs that people absolutely loved. And you
Mm.
wouldn't really see many of these individuals on panels because they're usually doing keynote sessions, right? And so it's one of those things where you had all these powerhouse individuals, um, eh, giving some QA, bouncing ideas off one another, and that was very, very special. That was very special.
That
So
is
yeah.
powerful. I know
Hmm.
some of the names like Andy Crestadina and
Yep.
others you had on there. I mean, just I've never seen, like you said, those people brought together in one session. That was a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we had Annie Christina, Mark Schaefer, Carlos Gil, Brian Fanzo. Oh my gosh, so many. Melinda Evans, uh, Ramon Ray. Um, Man, we had
Well,
a
just tell
a
folks
lot
to
of
check it
people
out.
that were thought leaders and practitioners in their industry, and it's actually still up. So the content is still up for people to check out if they want to as well, and that's digitalbrandingsummit.com.
Okay. In fact, if someone listening now is a subscriber to this podcast, almost every one of the people who've been in this podcast were also in that summit. So if you enjoyed an episode from this
Yes,
podcast, then you can definitely see them and learn more from them in your summit because I know at least four of what you just named I've spoken to in the past few months on the podcast. So
awesome.
definitely, like you said,
Yeah.
we run in the same circles, but those are some
Mhm.
amazing people to learn from.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's what it's all about, right? And that's one of the reasons why I love digital marketing overall, is because the industry is so dynamic, right? Like we can't call ourselves experts because, I mean, let's be honest, there's so many things happening that you cannot be an expert, right, at all things, but we
For about
certainly can be
5 minutes.
specialists. Yeah, we certainly can be specialists. We can be practitioners, we could
Yeah.
be those thought leaders, but experts, we cannot.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
the closest you can come to being an expert is picking a really narrow lane
exactly.
and being an expert in that narrow lane for about 5 minutes.
Until the algorithms change.
Till algorithms change, exactly.
Yeah.
Because I've spoken to people who, in fact, I don't narrow down who I speak to for the podcast because I know even if we all spent 24/7 trying to learn, there's something you were able to learn that I wasn't able to learn, and we can share.
Hmm.
And I learn something every episode because, like I said, like you just mentioned, there's so much going on and so much changing that we could all be learning, and we can't be experts. It's just hard to do.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And it's just also to add on to that perspective, right? I mean, even if it's something that you do
yeah,
know, right now you can get a different perspective, and that perspective provides diversity in thought, and diversity in thought creates better content, right? So
yeah,
absolutely, absolutely.
yeah. Well, one more thing on that event. So
Hmm.
this was just pre-pandemic, right?
It was pre-pandemic, yes.
Right, and it's a kind of, I think prophetic to be doing that because pandemic, everybody's scrambling to figure out how to do virtual events. And when you were doing this virtual event, it was almost like everybody's doing in person and you're developing this virtual event before everybody had to learn how to do it. And so you not only did it before the pandemic, before you had to, you did it well. And so kudos on that.
You know what? I really wish I could say, you know what, I just had enough forethought to figure that we are going to be in the worst pandemic of our lifetime, but I can't. And while many of my counterparts were doing physical conferences, we also wanted to do a physical conference, but we figured that doing this virtually would be more in line with our brand. Right? So
Hmm.
how can we have
Ah,
a digital
yeah.
branding summit if it's not on the digital platform, right? And
Ah,
so we
mm,
decided to go with an online platform for that.
that makes sense,
Hmm.
especially considering the 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 speakers you have. Because I'm thinking about, even with my podcast, it's like 8 out of 10 people have a microphone in front of them. They've got a good camera. They're ready to be on camera because we're in this digital world and we've accepted that our home office might be our office for a long
Right.
time. It might even just be
Yes.
the normal, right? So, you have people who are executives who now have cameras and microphones, maybe even a mixing board. They're learning things and doing things at a much higher level, creating great content from home.
All right.
Because if you call yourself a digital person or a digital marketer, your game is definitely going to be stepping up, right?
Oh, 100%. And even to add on to that, I mean, people are going to continue to work from home, and research shows that most people would even consider changing jobs if they have to go back to work, right? So, I mean, that when we look at that situation and align it with all the things that we were mentioning earlier in terms of building a digital brand, creating content, so and understanding that user journey, we have to think about really how the behaviors of consumers during the day, during that 9 to 5 time, has changed, right?
Mhm.
Because now they, instead of, for example, commuting, the things that they were doing before during their commute may be a little bit different now. They may be commuting to the kitchen to grab a cup of coffee and not going into that coffee shop, as an example,
Yeah.
right? So it's like your marketing messages have to make sure that it's aligned with the way in which consumers are behaving now, and the pandemic has drastically shaken that whole thing up. So yeah, it's interesting because people are working from home and we don't know when they're going back. And frankly, I think the majority of people who are working from home, at least that I know, certainly are more comfortable with it. And even if they're not comfortable working at home, I know people who have completely bought houses out of state, right? And
Yeah.
but they still have their job and their in their home, with their previous home location. So, yeah, we have to consider all that stuff.
Well, that's a perfect segue to the final question I want to ask you about. So you and I are both speaking at Digital Summit in Atlanta next week, which will be before this podcast is released. But in your session, you're talking about ways to readjust your content marketing plans for 2022. Of course, if you're talking about content marketing, I'm all ears because I want to know about content marketing. So tell us some of the adjustments you think marketers should make to their plans and maybe their budgets for 2022.
Yeah, and I that's a great question, and which is why I'm so excited to talk about that on stage at the Digital Summit Atlanta. But essentially, it's some of the things that I mentioned earlier in terms of figuring out the new journey for your target audience and aligning your content strategy with that new journey. An example that I use is an old broadcast, and you may be familiar with this, Ali, but a broadcast term called day parting. And it's
Mhm.
usually when content, or excuse me, programming, TV, television programming is really aligned with the specific parts of the day. I can remember when I was little, Saturday morning cartoons, and when I was younger, it was the Cosby Show and A Different World at like 8 o'clock, and
8
right, and
o'clock
those
and
are like the only
8:30, yeah.
things. Those are
Thursday
the
night.
only, yeah. That was the only thing that we were allowed to watch because it was during that time. It was like right before bed, and so on. And so you can use that same method to digital marketing, because now that the consumer behavior has changed based on the pandemic, their day parts are different, right? And so again, aligning your journey, aligning your content with that user journey is very, very important, and that's one of the ways that you can readjust. I think another one is understanding that paranoia is going to persist. And
Mm.
so when you think about creating that content, you have to focus on really the state of mind and the psyche of your target audience. Um, Example would be, um, when I'm at a hotel, what I look for is if their remotes are sanitized,
Yeah.
right? And so anytime a hotel displays that on their website or mentions that in their content, I'm going to think I'm going to seriously consider going to that hotel, because I know for sure their remotes are going to be sanitized. Some even put the little plastic bag around the remotes or
Mhm.
something like that, right?
Mhm.
So all those little things are important. And when you're creating your content calendar or your content strategy, those are some things that you should certainly consider. So those are just a few ways to readjust your marketing for 2022. And I'm gonna kind of leave a little hook there and say, check out the online session through digitalsummit.com, or maybe I'll come back on the podcast and give you guys the rest. Who knows?
Yeah, well, once this airs, we would have already both been spoken at Digital Summit, so we
Yeah,
won't give anything away because they won't hear
yeah.
this podcast till after we've already left the
Good
stage
point.
next week.
Yep. Good point. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
for the because I gave about two, so I
Okay.
have about six,
Oh
maybe
yeah.
seven
Got to
total.
save something. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
save
Yep.
something.
Mm-hmm.
Save something, definitely. Well, I
Yeah.
look forward to seeing you next week. That's for sure.
Absolutely, man.
And
Absolutely.
so, I want to make sure before we go, let the audience know, where to find you on your website and some of your content and where you'll be speaking at and all those good things.
Yeah. So if you want to reach out to me, I'm all over social media at Juntae Delane. Even if you don't know how to spell my name, simply just Google me. I'm going to pop up at some point. And then you can also check out digitaldelane.com. We are a full service digital agency. We really focus on helping founders and CMOs to build digital brands, bring new ideas or campaigns to life. If you are looking to get more information about digital branding, we have an awesome newsletter. It's called The Brand Behavior. And it's a very interactive and personalized newsletter, which means that each individual subscriber gets a different newsletter based on what their interests are. So if you click on a link about startup funding, or if you click on a link about content marketing, so on and so forth, after a while, the entire newsletter would give you only information that's relevant to your unique situation. So you can check that out at the agency website, digitaldelane.com, and just look for the brand behavior.
That's awesome, man. Look forward to that. Definitely.
Hmm.
So thank you again, Junte, for joining us. I mean, I always enjoy conversations with you because we definitely have some same thoughts, but like you said
Yep.
earlier, different experiences, and we both are trying to solve some of the same problems for our customers, for digital customers who need to understand digital better in different areas. And I enjoy talking to you because you really have the digital part in terms of the SEO and the paid ads and the branding part down. So it's always a pleasure to speak with you. So thanks again for joining the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right. And thanks to the listeners. If you're listening to the podcast and want to see Juntae and I video the podcast, and others are available in the podcast section of contentmonster.com. Once again, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to the Business of Marketing podcast, a show brought to you by contentmonster.com, the producer of B2B digital marketing content. Show notes can be found on contentmonster.com, as well as aleejudge.com. To continue the conversation, be sure to follow the podcast on your favorite podcast platform.